Hello and welcome, or Latas ir sveiki atveiki, as they might say in Lithuania. Please excuse my Lithuanian. To this very special webcast, courtesy of the European Institute of Health and Sustainable Development, EIHSD, about finding Europe-wide solutions to healthcare. My name is Joe Lynham, and for many years I was a business correspondent on the BBC, and I now present a program called The Newsroom on the BBC World Service. I hope all of you are keeping well and that you haven't caught this awful virus, which has taken so many lives on the continent and ruined so many livelihoods. If COVID-19 has taught us one thing, it has been to put healthcare at the centre of all of our lives. Today we'll discuss migration among healthcare workers to and within Europe. Today's debate is called Trends in Health Workforce Migration in the European Union. And this webcast is very timely. Only last week, Manfred Weber, the head of the EPP, which is the largest political group in the European Parliament, said, "We need a European Institute for Public Health. It is rather counterproductive for people's trust in authorities when measures are so different across the EU." He went on, take social distancing recommendations, for example. They should be the same in all EU countries. We'll be speaking to some key thinkers in Europe's healthcare sector about how or whether the industry has the right skills or manpower in the right places to enable the goal of universal healthcare. In a moment, we'll hear from the former EU Commissioner, Vytenis Andriukaitis, who is now the chair of the EIHSD. After Vytenis, we'll have two panels with two experts on each panel discussing an important healthcare issue. The first panel will deal with the recent trends in healthcare as well as the workforce in Europe. That will feature Jean-Christophe Dumont from the OECD and Markus Schneider from the Research Institute BASIS in Augsburg. Then in the second panel, we'll bring in Corinne Heenlopen from WEMOS in the Netherlands, as well as Gediminas Czerniauskas, who is a partner of the European Institute for Health and Sustainable Development in Vilnius. They'll be discussing the allocation of healthcare workforces in the EU, as well as international migration patterns, which might change things in years to come. All the biographies and the CVs and the resumes are available online on the website, which is eihsd.eu. And there's a special page there, Trends of Health Workforce Migration in the European Union. You can find it, don't worry. After we've heard from all four experts, I'm assuming that you're mostly familiar with how teams work. So please post your questions in the Q&A area on the bottom right on your screen. Look for the little question mark symbol. That's where you can pose your questions. And I will hopefully put some of those questions to the panel. Please tell us who you are when you're posting a question, who you work for, who you represent, if you represent someone, and who you would like to answer the question if you care. If you don't care, I'll pick someone. There will also be simultaneous translation in German, Lithuanian and French. So please go to the screen, the settings, pick the language you want, and subtitles will appear at the bottom of the screen. The hashtag, if you are tweeting, is sustainable development, all one word. Hashtag sustainable development. Everything's on the record, so please try to be nice and not to insult anyone else. Before all that, I'd like to play a short video for you, which sets out the themes that the Institute, the EIHSD, wants to discuss. So if you could play that video now, that'd be great.
Dear fellow leaders, we know you have a lot on your plate right now.
Every day you face difficult choices to save the lives and livelihoods of your people. So if you hear one message today, let it be this.
To end this crisis and build a safer, healthier future, now is the time to act for health systems that protect everyone.
We have learned a lot about COVID-19 and we know what it takes to build systems that protect everyone. We urge all of you to take these actions with us.
Prioritize universal health coverage now to beat COVID-19, alleviate anxiety and rebuild trust.
Fight systemic inequities by creating strong social and financial safety nets for those who need them most.
Get specific with your targets and communicate clearly and consistently with the public. Ensure that 2021 budgets allocate resources to health coverage.
Support, protect, and care for health workers, period.
Invest in primary health care as the first line of defense against outbreaks and the foundation of strong health systems. Health and finance ministers should work jointly for that.
Build partnerships through genuine civil society engagement.
Empower women who are proving to be highly effective leaders in health emergencies.
Rate universal health coverage principles more in every crisis response.
COVID-19 has been an extreme stress test for universal health coverage everywhere. It reveals gaps and inequities that should have been addressed long before the virus struck.
Remember, you committed last September to make these things right.
By taking these actions now with us, you can help societies emerge stronger.
Fellow leaders, we can reach health for all. First, we must protect everyone.
Thank you for all the contributors, as you can see there, from all over the world. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to the former Commissioner, Dr. Vytenis Andriukaitis, for his presentation about how to strike the balance between free movement of labour, universal health coverage and equal accessibility to healthcare for all citizens in the EU. Vytenis, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, like-minded friends, health is a fundamental value for humanity. Determinants of health, including properly staffed health systems, are a big issue for Europe and the globe. Most nations committed themselves to the universal health coverage, patient-centered approach, community-based treatment, leaving no one behind. Achievements of all these noble goals is impossible without appropriate healthcare workforce. Work for the elimination of labor shortages, for longevity of population are sides of the same coin, and I am proud to be between those who, by signing a manifesto for a European Health Union in 2020, were calling for stronger human capital and for more Europe in health. Today we are opening a new cycle of debates and discussions in the frame of 3 years project working together to address health workforce mobility in Europe. We are starting our debates on the basis of broad understanding already accumulated by research community, local, national, and international institutions. I would like to highlight some ideas on health workforce mobility in Europe that were developed before the project. First, while the magnitude and net directions of health professionals' migration flows change over time, there is an increasing trend of movements from lower income countries in Southern and Eastern Europe to higher income countries in Northern and Western Europe. Second, the main underlying causes of health professional migration and mobility are of socio-demographic, financial, organizational, managerial, and political nature. The knowledge of migration causes is immense, but political will to act is somehow in a short supply. Health worker mobility is not simply a problem in itself, but should rather be understood as an opportunity to even out the principles of free mobility with those of solidarity and of equal opportunity. Quick fixes interfere with long-term and evidence-informed policy making and investment in the health workforce. Commodification, commercialization, and privatization of public services interfere with the principle of solidarity and shared responsibility in support of equitable, sustainable health workforces. Health services are public goods according to the Constitution of WHO. They are constitutional public goods. Let's remember us. Gender power relations are replicated in health workforce migration. Today's discussions takes place 1 year since the World Health Organization declared the novel coronavirus outbreak a public health emergency of international concern, WHO's highest level of alarm. Since last spring, health systems are struggling with provisions of essential health supplies and services. Doctors, nurses, the auxiliary health personnel are on the front line. They are heroes of our time. Expertise and self-sacrifice of medical professionals saved hundreds of thousands. We salute our heroes, but at the same time, we should recognize weaknesses of health systems exposed and challenges created by the pandemic. Insufficient numbers of medical personnel in many national health systems are hampering provisions of life-saving services. In some countries, the smooth vaccination appears to be under threat because of shortages of workforce and especially nurses. Pandemic will bring changes and we should invest in understanding of these new developments. At the same time, a fundamental question, how to strike a balance between objectives Europeans are looking for will remain. The free movement of people is a cornerstone of an open and integrated Europe, but free movement should not undermine the understanding of the following. Immigration of highly educated workers places strain on countries of origin. This hampers the ability of sending states to deliver on the human right to health, while fueling nationalistic sentiments and eroding a vision of European solidarity. Big questions require greater expertise. Some of the best European experts will help us today to understand the complexity of health workforce mobility in Europe. I hope the discussion will bring us closer to understanding what local, national, pan-European and international policies are needed for proper development of human capital in the health sector, for the health and well-being of all our people, to speedy finding solutions that would benefit both donor and recipient countries. Let me remind you, health for all. A very important principle and slogan, health for all. COVID-19 caused suffering, but at the same time triggered opening of a new chapter of European health policy. Until recently, health-related matters were considered by the EU almost exclusively as business of the member states or quasi-markets. With COVID-19, there is a realization that the EU needs to be stronger in health. Manifesto for European Health Union, made public in November 2020, calls for responsibilities shared between the EU and member states in health, including, as I am quoting, recognizing the importance of health workforce, the European Union and the member states will work together to address the unequal distribution of the health workforce capacities in Europe, providing support to regions that have difficulties in attracting health workers, as well as promoting training and education of health professionals to common standards, coupled with measures to safeguard the rights of health workers from the rest of the world. Current health-focused actions of the Commission, especially an initiative on European Health Union, and more articulated emphasis on health in the frame of the European Pillar of Social Rights, corresponds to expectations of most of stakeholders in health in short-term perspective. The Conference on the Future of Europe, that should start in May this year, is a perfect platform to integrate stronger cooperation for health into mainstream European policies, to discuss the European Health Union as an initiative with potential to shape European politics for decades to come. And it is impossible to move forward without possibilities to find pan-European solutions addressing healthcare workforce shortages in the EU. Let us make today's webinar a step towards the European Health Union. Let us start our debate. Thank you, colleagues.
Now, Vytenis, thank you very much. I thought for a moment you were going to wear the mask and deliver your speech, but you didn't. Thank you. Stay with us, Vytenis. And you'll come back when we open up the floor to all your questions a little bit later on. Let's discuss our first big issue relating to workforces in healthcare, to discuss recent trends in international mobility of health workers across Europe and the OECD. Please welcome Jean-Christophe Dumont, the head of the International Migration Division at the Paris-based organization. Jean-Christophe is on the World Health Organization's expert advisory groups for both reviews on the relevance and effectiveness of the WHO Global Code of Practice on the international recruitment of health personnel. Jean-Christophe, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you, and actually I will share my screen. Some of the result of recent work that the OECD has carried out on this issue. I must say most of this work is joint work between the Migration Division of the OECD and the Health Division of the OECD. But this is also joint work between the OECD and WHO for the most part of it. But before I go into numbers, and I have quite a few to share with you today, let me give you a sense of the, let's say, overall background for the trends I will describe after. So first element of background is the fact that migration to OECD country and more generally globally has been increasing in the past decades. The total number of immigrants in the OECD increased by almost 50% in the past 15 years. The number of tertiary educated migrants in the OECD increased by 90%, almost double in the past 15 years, from 19 million to 35 million. But at the same time, looking at education policy, we also see a large increase in medical students intake and graduates in many OECD and EU countries. Back in 2006, we counted about 100,000 new medical doctors. In 2016, the number was 125,000, so a 25% increase in just 10 years. But at the same time, we also see a growing internationalization of higher education. The number of international students globally just exploded from 2 million in the early 2000s to more than 5 million in 2016-17. So it's a 155% increase. And medical students are also on the increase in this category. So, for example, about half of medical students in Ireland are international students, a third in Romania, about 25% in Poland. Obviously, we have also the political context, the enlargement of the EU in several steps, but also more recently the Brexit and very recently the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think has put a spotlight on the key issue, as the Commissioner just said, of health workforce, which is key to deliver health services and ensure universal health coverage in all parts of the world. OECD work in a nutshell, and I won't go into that, it's more for your reference, started back in 2007 with some data collection. And more recently, the OECD, together with ILO and WHO, have put together a program called Working for Health, which very much echoes the one we are discussing here, which aims at putting this issue of health workforce and migration in the broader context of skill mix, of skills development, of digitalization, and so on and so forth. What is clear is that, as I said, we have a new context, and therefore we have done some further work at the OECD. You have here the most recent publication with some links, and this week we will actually release 2 working papers which include the data that I will present to you now on both doctors and nurses. So what are these key trends? So the first slide basically shows the share of foreign-born and foreign-trained doctors and nurses across the OECD and their evolution since 2006. As you can see, about a fourth of all doctors are foreign-born in the OECD, and about a sixth of all nurses. Obviously, there are huge variations by country, and I will come back to that in a minute. Second thing that you can see here is that both lines, both of the 4 lines, are actually on the increase. The number of foreign-born doctors increased by about 28% in the past 10 years. The number of nurses almost increased by 50%. Again, in some countries, in Denmark, in Germany, the numbers have almost doubled. And third observation from these graphs is that the number of a share of foreign-born is higher than the share of foreign-trained, meaning that some people get training in the destination country, which could be linked to two different set of issues. One is that country of destination are actually contributing to the training of health workers. But second possibility, which happens in many cases, unfortunately, is that people initially train in their country of origin have actually to retrain because their qualifications are not recognized at destination. So when you look at the contribution of migrant workers, foreign-born in that case, to the growth of the health workforce across selected OECD countries in the past 5 years, what you can see is that for doctors in countries like Germany, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Australia, United States, and Canada, more than 50% of the growth in the number of medical doctors was actually due to foreign-born doctors. And in the case of nurses in Finland, Australia, Israel, Canada, US again, Austria, about a third of the growth was due to foreign-born nurses. Again, when looking at the differences across country, you can find again here the 26-27% I've mentioned before. There is a huge variety of situation across OECD country for sure. In some countries like Luxembourg, but also Australia and Israel, which is kind of a special case here, more than half of the doctors are foreign-born. In all countries, however, or in most countries, what you can see is that the bar is above the little diamond, meaning that the share of foreign-born among doctors is higher than the share of foreign-born among tertiary educated in general. Because as I said, this medical education does not happen in the limbo. It's also part of a general increase in highly skilled migration to OECD country more generally. But what this graph shows is that this phenomena is much more pronounced for doctors than it is for tertiary educated as a whole. The gap is above 10 percentage points in Australia, Ireland, United Kingdom, United States, for example. For nurses, the story is more or less the same, but the gap is much lower between the share of migrants among tertiary educated than for doctors. When we look at countries of destination, this graph is clearly showing that only a few countries, actually 5 countries, account for more than 3/4 of all migrants, receive more than 3/4 of all migrant workers and nurses in the OECD. United States, it's a large country in itself, receive 40 to 50% of doctors and nurses. But as I said, 5 countries, including Canada, accounts for largely over 75%. Actually, when we look at net stocks of migrants, doctors across OECD country, and this graph, which is a bit complicated to explain, but basically show what we call the cascade effect. The fact that you have some migrant workers going from, let's say, Lithuania to Germany, and then you have migrant workers going from Germany to, let's say, United Kingdom, and then you have migrant workers going from the UK to the US. But at the end, winner is the United States. United States has net stock of doctors, in that case foreign trained doctors, against all OECD countries. This is also more or less the case for all English-speaking countries, which are at the bottom of this graph, like Canada, Australia, or New Zealand. But if you look at the top of the graph, what do you think? As the Commission said, you find the Eastern European countries. Yes, Chile is there, but you have Slovak Republic, Czech Republic, you have Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, you have Latvia. These countries have net immigration against almost all OECD countries. So when we take a focus on what is happening within the EU, you know that there are some special provision for mutual recognition of qualification in the health sector in the EU, but people still need to go through a process that is referred to in this data. What you can see is the number of decisions taken on recognition of professional qualification within the EU and the European Economic Area in Switzerland has been increasing quite tremendously up to 2015-16, up to 2016 for doctors. It has been declining sharply since, and clearly it's unclear what the Brexit will produce in this area. But many people went to the UK. The UK in the COVID period has extended the validity of all permits for medical professionals. Maybe people will remain. Maybe the working condition will be very hard. Certainly, the new immigration condition will affect the flows into that country. When we look more broadly at the countries of origin, what you can see is, and it's normal, the main countries of origin for doctors, foreign trained or foreign born, and nurses are India, China, and the Philippines in the case of nurses. This is obvious. These are large countries, first of all, and second, in the case of Philippines, these are countries training for the world market. But also, interestingly, you see a lot of European countries identified in red here. You see Romania now as the 5th most important country of origin for doctors, for migrant doctors across the OECD as a whole, mostly in Europe, but also to other OECD countries. You see Poland there, and you see also Poland and Romania very high ranked for nurses. But you also see, as I said, UK, Germany, obviously not going to the same country, most of them going to Canada, Australia, and the United States. If you look at the same thing, but as a proportion of a number of doctors in the country of origin. We have the same graph for nurses if you are interested. So these are showing emigration rate of native-born doctor on the x-axis and emigration rate on of the home-trained doctors on the y-axis. Everything which is on the right hand to the red line means that at least a third of home-trained of native-born doctors are working in other OECD countries. And it can go very high, up to 75% for native-born workers from Liberia, for example, and from a number of Caribbean countries. What you see here, outstanding, certainly is Romania. You see also a number of French-speaking African countries in the middle of this graph, like Cameroon, Senegal, Congo, Togo. You see a number of small island states in the Caribbean, and you see a number of very poor countries, including Zimbabwe, Haiti, for example. So this is really a matter of concern, because in the case of all these countries, a very large share of their workforce is actually either home trained or born in the country, is actually working elsewhere in the OECD. Maybe a line of a positive finding in this picture coming from this graph, which shows the variation of the of a number of doctors in the country and numbers of doctors working abroad. So basically, if you are on the bottom part of a graph, it means that the number of doctors at home is increasing faster than the number of doctors going abroad, meaning that the immigration rate has been decreasing in the past 15 years. But if you are on the left-hand side of this graph, this is the reverse. The number of doctors at home is increasing less fast than the number of immigrant doctors. And here, the good news is that you see on the right-hand side the low-income country. Those who have the lowest level of per inhabitant doctors have actually been able to grow their workforce in the recent years. But the less good news is for WHO Europe, and particularly if we would have been able to identify for those countries in Central and Eastern Europe who are losing the most, where the number of doctors has grown over the past 15 years, but less so than the number of immigrant doctors. Immigration rate has been increasing, and quite significantly in some cases. Along all the countries, this is the region which has suffered the most from this phenomenon. So let me just end with a few ideas for policy responses. We believe at the OECD, together with our colleagues from WHO, that the implementation to its full scope of the WHO Global Code of Practice is one of the elements of a response. And WHO Code of Practice does not prevent migration from happening, but is calling for fair migration. And second bullet, increasing training capacity of all countries, notably these receiving countries which are depending on health workforce to respond to their domestic shortages and misdistribution. So it happens in different form in France, in rural areas, in the UK, in the national public health system. We also think, as the Commissioner said, that it's very important to ensure that migrant health workers have equal working conditions, which is not necessarily always the case, and that we acknowledge their contribution to the functioning of national health system, including in the context of COVID-19. Some countries have took action to recognize, reward these migrant health workers. I think this is an important step to take. In order to address the risk of brain waste, it's very important to streamline procedure for recognition of foreign qualification. Obviously, within the European context, this is less of an issue, but as people coming from third country are also contributing to compensate for this intra-EU mobility, this is a very important step to take, including in the EU. And globally, this is a global issue. Overseas development assistance and technical assistance need to be reinforced to help less advanced countries to build up a sufficient health workforce and strengthen their health system. and mitigate the factors that are pushing professionals to leave. You can also bring this last point in the European context and think about improve the system to improve the fairness and the solidarity mechanism the Commissioner was just talking about, in order to balance indeed these two objectives, which are free movement. There is no question about trying to limit migration, but also ensuring equal access to healthcare to all. Thank you very much.
Merci, Jean-Christophe. Thank you for that very interesting presentation. I certainly learned a lot, and we already have one or two questions, Jean-Christophe, which I will put to you after we've heard from Markus Schneider from the Research Institute BASIS in Augsburg in Germany. He'll be discussing the following topic: the system of health accounts as a tool for healthcare labour force management. Markus, the floor is yours. Bitte.
Thank you for invitation to this interesting meeting. So my viewpoint is that health workforce shortage is a failure of the system, a disease of the health system. And the question I would like to discuss with you is what are our diagnostic tools to diagnose this shortage, and how should we go forward to get better and not contradicting figures about health workforce shortage. Now, it's absolutely necessary to integrate health accounts or labor accounts in the system of health accounts. Now, I think that the graph presented by Dr. François Decaillé, 2007, in a meeting of the Regional Europe World Health Organization, makes very clear that the connection between health and economy is over labor and education and productivity. Also now the system, the Sustainable Development Goals are clear in that direction, that they say health labor is a precondition for health coverage. Now there are so many points which claim for further analysis of health workforce shortage, and the question arises, why, as we know that already a long time and discussed that already now 20 years, why are labor accounts not yet integrated into the broader system of health accounts? Even there are limits in the national accounts. One point is certainly that outcome measurement was a priority, and complexity, missing statistical resources, workload in the European system of health system of statistical accounts are other factors which contributed to these limits. But however, there are experimental statistics which are very promising. Now, the good point is, the good news, it's really that there are possibilities to link the different accounts. And by this is it possible to say something about the total workforce in working in the health system. One could say, oh, that's a simple question, why we do not use that and why we do not discuss that. Now, the point is that we have very different systems and do not combine it. Now, the linkage is possible, as I say here, over the common activities in industries. And we have done this, and I will show you some results. Now, let's start with the national accounts and the workforce in the national accounts. There you can see on the right side Germany with the highest figure of national of employment in healthcare in European 27. Germany has the highest number of persons working in healthcare, 38.6 per 1,000 population. And Germany and Denmark employ almost twice as much people in healthcare as Romania, Cyprus, Croatia, Bulgaria, Greece, and Hungary. Most states, as already was mentioned by Jean-Christophe, of Central European countries are at the lower side. Now, in social care, the disparities of workforce densities are even higher. But the main problem is that we consider this in Germany. We have still in Germany a workforce shortage. Now, if we combine the system of health accounts, that means financing data, with employment data of national accounts, then we get this picture. You can see the Nordic country in Germany with high expenditures and high employment. And in Portugal, you find high expenditure, and in Spain, high expenditures, but low employment. And this is what we have to consider. And but SHA, the system of health account and the system of national accounts, in combining to each other, helps us better to understand what is behind this structure. Low expenditure ratios and low workforce densities hold for Italy and several Central and East European countries, here the green countries in this graph. A country with low expenditures but high employment, which needs certainly further reflection, is Ireland. Now, health labor shortages are measured regularly by the public employment services and reported. These are the data from 2016. And you can see in this study from the labor offices who reported shortages, you find a lot of countries which are on the top of countries with high employment ratios. So we see that shortage of occupations are often combined with high employment. Detailed statistics allow furthermore vertical and horizontal mismatches to analyze across skills. Now, this means that you maybe have too many people in higher educated jobs than in lower educated jobs, or in assistant professions than in higher educated professions. Now, a complete contradicting build is given by the global burden of disease approach, which measures needs-based health workforce shortage across not only the European 27 countries, but around the world with about 195 countries or 91 countries. But in this approach, health workforce shortage does not show any shortage for many European countries. This depends also on the approach chosen, namely only minimum health workforce is accounted. So the present global burden of disease approach, and also the approach used by WHO, does not distinguish different types of skills and mismatches, and is linked to the global development of income, and does not very help much to to analyze the shortages within European countries. Now, what could be a remedy? Like the global burden of disease approach, there are health or disease-based accounting tools available, and it's possible to see the growing interdependency among health labor in integrating accounting systems with deployment services, healthcare and outcomes measurement. The HADIC project of Eurostat has shown the feasibility of cost of illness accounts in Europe. Technically speaking, this means linking health labor accounts and health disease accounts requires to link diseases and conditions, professional skills and labor coefficients into SHA. Detailed data on working time and professional inputs across diseases are required. Big data are needed or may be considered to get more light in the variation of comorbidities and flows of skills. And these basic tools we need to understand better why we are reporting with one instrument shortages and in the other instrument we have a complete contradicting view. Now it's not only that we have to work, I think, more in linking accounting tools, but go back and discuss what are really the basic assumptions behind our models, and when we measure shortage and how we can define nationally standards of health workforce shortage, because we have very different standards, for example, for primary care doctors in European countries. Now the SHA core framework and the location of cost of illness accounts or and health labor accounts can help us to get here more shade, more light into the flows of health workforce and into the stocks. How to organize integrated health labor accounts across member states in practice is also an important question, what we have to address. I think the WHO handbook on health labor accounts includes very helpful steps to go forward and to help us to develop a better diagnostic tool to discuss this issue and to understand the problems in Europe. I would like to end with this, because we are still in the beginning of understanding what is really behind that, and need to go forward with this practical, empirical research and accounting. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vielen Dank, Markus. Herzlichen Dank dafür. Stay there. I'm going to put another quick question that I got from the audience, actually, if I may, to Jean-Christophe. Jean-Christophe, are you there? Hopefully you can unmute your microphone. A question, and they didn't want to give their name. They're a little bit shy. They said, how do you ensure equal employment conditions for migrant workers, given the fact that that includes quite a lot of students as well? Jean-Christophe, did the OECD look into how that might be possible?
Well, I think there are cases hopefully limited where the law is breached, and this requires action in justice. But more fundamentally, the unequal working condition arise ever from difficulties in getting full skills recognized. Sometimes, notably from third country, you have nurses working as assistant nurse, doctor working as nurse, etc. And this is a loss for everyone, and that are issues that can be addressed if you are the appropriate recognition mechanism, but also bridging courses to enable people to reach the standards which are required in each health system. And more broadly, what we see is that migrant workers are overrepresented in the most difficult position, in emergency rooms, in night shifts, in this sort of position that the national workforce does not necessarily want to take, because let's say the pay rate of a return you get for the extra effort is not necessarily well rewarded. So it's also by making sure that everyone is rewarded according to his contribution, that you can address this issue and make sure that you don't rely on migrant workers to fill the gaps in your health system.
Merci, Jean-Christophe. Can I bring in the boss, Audrius? Can I bring in Vytenis, please? Vytas Androukaitis. We got a question, Vytenis, about the manifesto, the EIHSD manifesto. Did you want to say a few words before we move on to the next panel about the manifesto, remind people what we all agreed?
Yes, okay. I am very happy to remind people about our manifesto, because now we need as never activities from NGOs and from Europeans to sign such manifestos. You know, you can find manifesto www.europeanhealthunion.eu and to go into this page and to find such manifesto, because manifesto is just calling of European national parliaments, NGOs, governments, and also regional and local authorities to be active and to put pressure on the governments and on those who can be, responsible to include into agenda of European health on Conference on Future of Europe issues related to European Health Union. As you know, in our manifesto we propose 3 ways to strengthen health dimension in the EU policies, but 2 tools only can deliver limited progress in speaking about health issues. But third way, when we are asking about possibilities to improve Lisbon Treaty and to enshrine some amendments into Lisbon Treaty and really to keep eyes to have a genuine European health union, is only one way now to send those messages to national parliaments, to governments, to accept it and to see how can we move quick as possible till May to receive feedback from national governments and to have to keep in our hands agreements that such questions should be included into Conference on Future on the EU.
Thank you very much. Achu, can I say that? Vytenis, thank you for your help. Now, stay with us, Jean-Christophe and Marcus. We will be coming back to you for the big Q&A at the end. So don't forget to post your questions out there. We've already mentioned 1 or 2 of your questions. Don't be shy. A lot of you are saying and staying anonymous. Don't be afraid to tell us who you are and who you represent. Don't be shy. As they say in Scotland, shy children get nae sweets. Anyway, let's move on to our next panel, in which we will be discussing the allocation of the healthcare workforce in the EU, as well as international migration patterns, which might change in the coming years. In a moment, we'll hear from Corinne Hinlopen from WEMOS think tank in the Netherlands. But first, I'd like to invite Gediminas Czerniauskas to join us. Gediminas is a partner here in the European Institute for Health and Sustainable Development in Vilnius. His issue is entitled Trends That May Change International Migration Patterns in the European Union, Case Study on Lithuania. You can unmute yourself there, Gediminas, and the floor is yours.
We had the very important information about trends that already exist for last 10-20 years in Europe regarding migration of health personnel. I would like to tackle the future. Of course, future is uncertain, but we do have certain already official forecasts. And on the basis of Lithuanian statistics of recent developments in Lithuanian migration patterns, I will try to consider that may be different options to those expressed in forecasts developed by Eurostat or OECD or Lithuanian Department of Statistics may happen. So this is a slide on population growth. And unfortunately, forecast for 2020-2030 developed by OECD or Eurostat or Department of Statistics shows the population of Lithuania. My country lost a lot of people, almost 1 million since 1990, and according main forecast, the trend is going to continue regardless of forecaster or different assumptions in the projection. Now let's look to GDP growth. Lithuania is a small country, so not so many people involved in forecasting, but we do have some. For example, in 2015, we had forecast by OECD. It's Lithuania, Latvia, Poland as an example, and we see that for all countries, a slower growth is predicted because of slower productivity and most likely the same depopulation what was reflected on the first slide. Now, closer to health, depopulation and slow growth of GDP may result in decrease of health spendings to GDP. This is against forecast from OECD, and you see for Lithuania it's foreseen that share of total health expenditures will decrease from 6.5% to 6.2% during 15 years. It is an opposite to general trade for OECD countries, where growth from 8.8 to 10.4% is predicted. So now, if these forecasts will be correct, so quite likely the demand of healthcare labor force in Central and Eastern European country, because Lithuania is just an example, will decrease. And in this case, outflow of medical personnel may be not a brain drain, but a factor reducing brain waste caused by unemployment in the source countries. So this is one scenario of the development, but maybe we can look for more optimistic option. For example, when you're looking to Lithuanian figures on net migration, that means emigration minus immigration, you see that it's true that in 2010 was big outflow, 80,000 of people lost Lithuania, but it is a reduction by years. And since 19, we have already blue those columns and a positive net migration to Lithuania. So question is it an exception because of Brexit or COVID or some other issues, or it's a new normal? Demographers think that it's exception because, again, further you see figures forecast by Lithuanian Department of Statistics is saying that emigration or loss of population will continue in years to come. But let's look to economics. Usually there is an assumption that migration is related to economic development. Most of Central European countries are slowly but catching with Western Europe regarding GDP per capita. Here are figures from Eurostat. GDP per capita assumed that European average is 100. In purchasing power parities. And we see that Lithuanian share is growing from 61% during last 10 years to 84%. Britain's, it's the biggest country of migration from most Central European countries, is going down from 111 to 104. So there is a convergence. And if there is a convergence, quite likely migration should go down. And this is just statistics where on x-axis we have share of Lithuania in this case, of GDP per capita to European average. It's growing, and here it's migration, and it's quite clear trend that convergence with Europe means reduction of migration and maybe even positive migration in the nearest future. And here, based on this assumption that convergence may change migration patterns, two different forecasts. This law already shown Department of Statistics forecast, which indicates that immigration or net negative migration will continue. This is a forecast done by Health Economic Center, commissioned by Lithuanian Ministry of Health. Now, let's assume that maybe Ministry of Health is biased. We want better figures of migration for more budget in the future. But the average of those two estimates also is quite positive. Here are monthly figures. We are living in period of crisis, and sometimes yearly figures are not enough. We need more precise funding, more precise information. And again, each month you see until 19, it was net migration, this line with net emigration, yeah, with lost people because of migration and because of natural increase. We still have negative natural increase, especially in December of this year because of COVID, but we have already quite strong increase because of migration, and this is kind of support this more optimistic outlook for population growth. And here is figures here on not migration but population of Lithuania. Orange line is forecast by Department of Statistics. Blue line is forecast commissioned by Ministry of Health, and this is average of those two forecasts. So nobody knows the future, but why not to assume that it will be brighter when most is seeing it today. Again, this is attempt also to bit upgrade forecast for GDP growth. Blue figures are projection of OECD from 2015, and orange figures are projection of Health Economic Center. And here it's again more interesting. It's a share of GDP spent on health. These are figures, blue figures with blue columns, forecasted by OECD. Lithuania, Latvia are the only OECD countries for whom the basic scenario of OECD foresees a reduction of health spendings as share of GDP. A prognosis of Ministry of Health is in opposite direction, that share of health in GDP will grow, the same as in most of OECD countries. If so, quite likely we will have much bigger healthcare expenditures. Again, with a combination of those two forecasts, a stronger demand for health labor workforce, and that's why probably different outlook for migration of doctors from Lithuania as well as other countries. So I do not want to say that everything looks bright from Lithuanian perspective, and just example where Lithuania is doing not so well. And this was recorded meanwhile by OECD as well. Lithuania, in its official documents, its Lithuanian health strategy for 2014-2025, decided to increase ratio of nurses to doctors from 1.8 to 2.7 in 2025. As you see, actual figures in blue are very different. Instead of growth, Lithuania has constant reduction of this ratio, and it's quite stable. So most likely this objective will not be achieved, and that's why it makes sense to talk about problems in the future as well. And now for conclusions. Countries of New Europe may gradually transform themselves from donors to recipients of workforce from third countries. Motive of East-West migration in between EU countries from search for higher salary abroad may converge with those common to Western Europe. Management of medical deserts may be prioritized not just in the EU, while problems of brain drain and brain waste will constitute one of many issues of global policy. And the last question, should we talk about old and new Europe 15 years after the enlargement? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Gediminas, and I hope you appreciate me coming to you when you weren't expecting me. I was just testing you to see if you were concentrating. You passed the test. Well done. I know Corinna was expecting me. Apologies for that. I'm going to bring in Corinna very shortly, but I just wanted to remind people of what Vaitina said about the EIHSD manifesto. If you didn't hear what he said, then you can read it on www.European Health Union, all one word, no spaces, .eu, EuropeanHealthUnion.eu. Now, I'll come back to you, if I may, Gediminas, with some questions when I bring everybody back in. But I'd like to bring in Corinna Hinlopen from WEMOS think tank in the Netherlands. Corinna will be discussing the topic of suboptimal allocation of healthcare workforce in member states. Medical deserts in Europe. Massive difference. Corinna, je bent dran.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm also very happy to be on this panel of distinguished speakers. My name is Corinna Hinlopen, very aptly pronounced by Joe. Well done, well done. Global Health Advocate at WEMOS Foundation in the Netherlands. And the title of my presentation, Suboptimal Allocation of Healthcare Workforce in Member States, Medical Deserts. And yes, I have corrected many a desert in many documents to deserts again, but medical deserts. I will be presenting a preliminary analysis of what WEMOS did with 5 partner organizations across Europe on the phenomenon of medical deserts. And we made this analysis responding to the European Commission's call for grant in the 3rd EU Programme for Health, specifically on the topic of support to health workforce reforms initiatives on medical deserts. And I'm very pleased to add here that our proposal has reached the grant preparation phase. So I'm in the fortunate position to be able to give you a sneak preview of our project. So I will go into a couple of questions like medical deserts. What is it? Why are they a problem? What are root causes? How are we going to tackle them? And why is it such a wicked problem? And I've had to be very selective in what I'm going to present here because I needed to be very brief, 10 minutes only. But please do not hesitate to come forward with your questions and insights later in the Q&A section. So, medical deserts, there is a working definition which was given in the annual work program of the European Commission, and it's isolated or depopulated areas and urban and rural areas with a low concentration of services. Medical deserts has been conceptualized actually in France, where about 18% of the population lives in areas where access to healthcare is limited. But the same or similar phenomenon occurs in several other regions in the European Union, but in different manifestations and with different causes and different effects. So it's not just a problem of geographical remoteness, as some people seem to think. So in the context of health workforce reforms, medical deserts are characterized by falling number of medical practitioners, inadequate composition of healthcare professionals teams to serve the local population's needs, and little or no access to digital technologies that could actually support healthcare provision. So when we were building our project consortium with partners from Romania, Serbia, Moldova, Italy, and the Netherlands, and we started talking about this phenomenon, we discovered that they experience very different sorts of medical deserts. So we came to the conclusion that it is very important to understand these different manifestations and to distinguish between them. Because you want corrective interventions and policies to be as specific and as context appropriate as possible. So what we will set out to do in our project, and also responding to the EU's calls objectives, is to work on a sort of a typology or taxonomy or whatever you want to call it of medical deserts and medical desertification in order to be able to support evidence-based policy making. And this taxonomy will look at different features, and I've named just a few, and this is not necessarily exhaustive. The nature of the medical desert, are we talking about a scarcity of primary care facilities, community care? Is it tertiary care? Because that also can be a problem. We have also an epidemic of CVD, cardiovascular disease, cancers. There's also issues in responding to the needs to treat rare diseases. What are the effects? Is it unmet medical needs? Is it life expectancy? Is it fewer years in good health? Is it longer travel times to appropriate facilities? And what is the magnitude of the effects? To what extent are the relevant indicators different from national averages or EU averages? Who are the affected populations? Is it specific socioeconomic groups, rural communities, urban pockets, and also in the case of some of our project countries, large communities of Roma people who have been very disadvantaged already for a number of years. So root causes, of course, I mentioned that. Understanding the specific features of the medical deserts helps in identifying the core problem in such a way that it can be addressed at the appropriate policy level and with the appropriate action. So why is it a problem? Well, definitely the most compelling reason is that it affects the health and well-being of thousands, 10,000s, 100,000s, maybe even millions of people. But for us as a public health community, it's a challenge because we have this ambition to reach universal health coverage in the European region. It's defined as core priority number 1 in WHO's European Regional Programme of Work. Also, the existence of medical deserts adds to health inequalities, and reducing health inequalities between and within member states has been identified as a cross-cutting issue in the third EU health programme. And I want to make an important observation here, and that's the difference between a medical desert, so a traditionally underserved community, and medical desertification, if that's a word. That is the process of declining access to medical services, including access to a qualified health worker. Because if you happen to live in an area that is becoming a medical desert, and it's actually increasing inequalities, it's that increasing inequality that has a strong effect on people's well-being and contributes to their feeling of being left behind and neglected and unheard and unseen. Because most medical deserts, let's face it, they're not just isolated and depopulated areas devoid of medical services. They often also lack access to other essential public services, such as education facilities, public transportation. There's often underinvestment in economic activity, so there's high unemployment, greater economic vulnerability than in other parts of the country where they live. And this affects the overall well-being of its communities and contributes to that generalized perception of being left behind. So the societal impact of neglected regions is therefore much, much greater than just the impact on health. It's about well-being in the broadest sense of the word. So what are root causes? I'm looking here again at the context of health workforce reforms. And I'm well aware that medical deserts are not just caused by health workforce challenges, but once you get into the analysis of root causes, you will see that the underlying problems of medical deserts on the one hand and health workforce weaknesses on the other can be quite similar and overlapping. We'll get to that a bit later. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this root cause analysis because there's actually a wealth of information on health workforce distribution issues, on efficiencies in education and deployment, retention policies, health workforce governance issues, the lack of implementation of technical tools and instruments, drivers of migration within countries as well as between countries. So I've just put in a rather random selection of insights and evidence. But the most important message here is to really look on a case-by-case basis, so that is for specific medical deserts, at the differentiated effects of specific medical deserts, but also at the differentiated immediate causes and underlying causes. And this is, in my view, nicely visualized here. And again, this detailed understanding is necessary in order to be able to understand all the details, formulate the core problem, and then to be able to develop context-specific interventions. So how to tackle them? Well, of course, our project is going to, we know what we are going to do. And there, I listed a few of these things. As I said, we have a wealth of information already on root causes, so there's also quite some technical and managerial tools and instruments, if you would like to call them like that. National Health Workforce Accounts, they have been mentioned before, health labor market analysis, training of national planning and forecasting capabilities, formulating cost strategies for future-proof health workforce development, etc., etc. So make use of experiences elsewhere, what has worked where and why, adapt them to context. And of course, we will look at desk research of peer-reviewed articles, but we've also discovered that there is actually a lot of gray literature on the topic, on actions undertaken to tackle health workforce challenges. They're not always easy to find. It starts, for example, with some media exposure, and you need to follow up with some phone calls, conduct some key informant interviews, because not all of these interventions, of course, are taking place in a sort of controlled academic research setting. They're rather live experiments and they're not always well documented, but they could be worthwhile looking at and learning from. Then what we will do is try and develop these context-specific new interventions. And we will also use, if and when appropriate, existing codes of conduct and practice. And the WHO Global Code of Practice on the international recruitment of health personnel has already been mentioned. There's also the EPSI-HOSPEEM Code of Conduct on cross-border recruitment. And again, if this is appropriate in a certain context or in a certain country, we will definitely look at how they are implemented and if they are followed. There's not always a direct causal relationship between unethical recruitment practices, for example, and the existence of medical deserts, but it could help to raise awareness and draw a specific attention to these situations, and we might want to focus more on this part. So, but more importantly, I'd like to say a few words on the how of our project. Because what we will do is we will select a few medical deserts in the partner countries in their different manifestations and then proceed as follows. We really want to try and understand existing concepts of health, well-being, of care in these selected areas, in their specific social, cultural and political context at local level as well as at national level. We will analyze what kind of interventions have already been taken and how effective or ineffective they were and why. We will develop new or adapted context-specific, feasible and multi-level interventions with ownership. And we are going to do that in a participatory and inclusive way, because we were very inspired by WHO's strategy for integrated people-centered health services, in which communities play a crucial role in shaping health policy and health services. Because, you know, you want to make them visible and you want to give them a voice. These are people with what they call in jargon compounded vulnerabilities. So they need to, you want them to take ownership and to be able to co-create solutions. Obviously, this also means that we will be engaging with multiple stakeholders and health professionals, affected communities, obviously, patients' representatives, trade unions, facility managers, policymakers, politicians at the appropriate level again. And I would really like to stress the multiple level interventions part here. Because the problem of maldistribution of health workers within and across member states is really, it's a wicked problem. And they need these multi-level interventions because these challenges, they occur often in a context of persistent budgetary constraints. We're talking about deprioritizing health and social systems in favor of other sectors at national level. But we've also seen severe financial cutbacks at national level affecting this health and social care as a result of conditionalities, for example, from international loans, from international financing institutions, especially, for example, after the economic and financial crisis of 2008. And this has been a crucial contributing factor to the weakening of health systems, especially in Southern and Eastern Europe, including massive layoffs of health workers, for example, because the public purse for health expenditures had to go down. And then we have the freedom of movement of workers in the European Union. This has also been mentioned before. And again, we're not going to question this pillar of the European integration. We're not going to criticize individuals, migrant health workers, for their wish and their desire to move abroad. But we need to recognize as a union that this mobility, when it is excessive and when it is skewed, it has unintended and unwanted consequences. And this again relates to the concept of this free market thinking. The neoliberal idea is that a need automatically transforms into a demand in economic terms that will be satisfied by a supply that is automatically offered to satisfy the demand, because there is money to be made. But we've seen that there is lots of need in the field of health that is not being addressed. There is a lot of need, but no supply. And this thinking of of a free market, so to speak, this holds true to, for example, color TVs, but not to health. Health is a human right. It's a must-have. It's not a nice to have. So the health labor market is not a free market in the purely economic sense, and we really have to abandon the idea, that idea, and treat it differently. And of course, when looking for solutions, we stumble upon the subsidiarity principle and the limitations of the EU mandate. I personally have the feeling that there is more possible within the current mandate than we now know or make use of. But it's not for nothing that we now have this manifesto for European Health Union, because we want the mandate to be stronger. We want member states to join action and move forward in solidarity with each other. And that means that we need this action at EU level. And this is going to be interesting and complex and difficult, because all these member states have different interests. But it is absolutely essential if we want to move forward. I leave it at that. Thank you.
Hartelijk bedankt. Dankjewel.
Alsjeblieft.
Blijf een momentje. Stay a moment there. I'm going to bring everybody back in now. I have a follow-up question for you, Corinna, which we have got from the audience. But I'm going to bring everybody else back in for a kind of one big happy family Q&A. But my first question will be to you, Corinna, if I may. And I know you alluded to technical solutions, but one of the questions we got from the audience was, can IT and new technologies help improve medical accessibility to regions which might be described as medical deserts? And I say that as a father who had to call up the doctor for advice during lockdown, and the doctor wouldn't see my son, and was able to help quite a bit over the phone. And I'm just wondering whether that will accelerate the use of remote doctors or e-doctor, whatever you want to call it? Corinne.
Yes, no, that's a very, very good question. And yes, there is a great potential in digital health innovations that has been as yet unexplored, actually, I think, or underused maybe. And there's all sorts of different, priority programs. It's a flagship program in the European Union for the WHO. And there's a lot of health service provision improvement to be gained there. At the same time, we need to take into account that there is also this digital divide. There are still, there are lots of people actually who are not very conversant with digital health, with mobile phones, with smartphones, especially with all kinds of apps. And if you offer digital solutions that the majority of the people will be able to use, it will benefit them enormously. But it's especially those that are being left behind again, that are somehow more vulnerable than others, that may have more difficulty using those digital innovations. So you have to really work on health literacy for everyone, including those left behind. You also need to increase skills and attitudes and preparedness of health workers to use them and to use them properly. And the interesting thing is, you mentioned that your doctor didn't want to see you, your son. What I've seen in the Netherlands is that the uptake of digital tools during the COVID epidemic, when regular care was suspended, especially GP care, there was the uptake was very great. I mean, there was a lot of electronic consultation going on. And when the first lockdown ended and measures were lifted, they were abandoned just as quickly. So we need to do a lot there also at the side of health workers. But yes, there's a great potential. Yes.
Thank you very much, Corinne. Now, maybe Vytenis, I could ask you to unmute. I have a very big question, and it's the big issue over the last few days, and that is the role of the European Commission and the rollout of vaccines and the trouble it got in on Friday, especially in the island of Ireland, by introducing emergency measures and potentially putting a border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. Very politically sensitive, as you know. No one knows the European Commission better than you. What do you think of this, which a lot of people are calling a debacle when it comes to vaccines? Vytenis.
Yeah, it's a very sensitive question from political point of view and from practical point of view, and also from point of view speaking about capacities of European Commission to do something more. As you know, Lisbon Treaty do not allow European Commission to have more powers. And today I see clear example of contradiction. People think and ask Commission to do more, but at the same time, Lisbon Treaty and member states and countries and governments do not allow Commission to have instruments in the Commission hands. It's very difficult, and also Commission is under fire from different angles, like scapegoat in this situation. And you see, how can you react immediately if you can see, sorry to say, but very dishonest behavior from some pharma companies, which have no chance to explain to you why they are playing such game, and only one way to intervene immediately to, of course, to limit export of some elements from EU market, because we need to have in our hands vaccines. And of course I am proud that Commission reacted very quickly, but people think that Commission must do more. Sorry, now it's time to rethink our Lisbon Treaty. And we can, once again, to understand, we can bring more powers to the European Commission Act, especially in areas of emergencies. Otherwise, please look at example, solidarity between member states. Now, vaccine nationalism in the EU is a real example. and all are thinking only about you know, their own national interest, not thinking about possibilities to really join forces and to help Commission and to act together in very comprehensive, very coordinated and very, you know, united voice addressing those tragic situations with shortages of vaccines. Now blaming, shaming, it's not a way. And of course, please understand it. If we will stay as now without common solidarity actions, no one can help, especially for smaller and low-income countries. It's very difficult to see. I think, yes, Commission can do something to show that Commission has instruments in their hands, limited instruments, but they do it. And of course, I think I think it can create a lot of different you know, interpretations. But doesn't matter. We need to act, and we need to show that yes, we are capable to you know, to show our common approach addressing all challenges. If some multinational companies behave not in you know, in proper manner.
Okay, Vytautas, thank you. That a lot of passion there. Markus Schneider in Augsburg, can you unmute yourself, please, and give us your thoughts on how the Commission is handling the vaccine rollout in the European Union and the contractual arguments with the pharmaceutical companies? Markus Schneider. Here we go.
It's a good question. We have a lot of discussion around that. Also about the German responsibility in the when Germany has the presidency. We had yesterday a press conference by the German government on the situation and the German situation, but also the European situation. And one explanation was that not sufficient material or ingredients for the production of the vaccines can be produced. I think it depends really very much on the type of the vaccine which is produced by Moderna or BioNTech or AstraZeneca, are very different vaccines. And so the ingredients are also, and the production process are different. I think in general, we should look more forward and not to think about it, because in general, we are in a very happy situation to have now already so a lot of vaccines, and it's clear that we are able to master the situation, the future situation, but it depends very much on the responsibility of the people. And now to put, say, the pharmaceutical companies in, or the behavior of the pharmaceutical companies in this uncertain situation, and to question it. I'm not sure if this brings us forward. Also, not what we discuss in Germany presently, that there is a non-market approach to take regulation over production of these things will bring us forward. I think from the presentation what Gediminas made about the long-term trends, we see that the internal market has also positive effects, and many positive effects. And we have to think about market failures, certainly, but also on government failures. And if we now make steps forward, it's important to be clear about that. And to avoid government failures, I think it's also necessary to strengthen the European Commission. I mean, these are two sides. One has always see like now also Corinne looked on the national level, and then more deeper on the regional level, what happens there. But on the other side, one has to strengthen also vertically the approach, between the regional effects to see how the regional effects are related then to national situation. And in general, I'm very optimistic about the long-term development related to the vaccine development. So we are, I think, in a strong situation and should not now, because of, in reality, very short-term bottlenecks in the production, to question our system, which is in general very successful in Europe.
Okay, herzlichen Dank, Markus. I'm going to bring in Gediminas again. Two questions for you, Gediminas, if I may. First of all, about Lithuania. Do you think the situation in Belarus across the border from you is going to help in terms of population? I.e., will people move from Belarus, and can they move from Belarus into Lithuania? I know the Lithuanian foreign minister has been very helpful to the people of Belarus. Also, which do you worry most about? And this is not just for Lithuania, but for all of Europe. Aging population, a rise in chronic or long-term illnesses, or medical desertification or deserts? That's two questions for you, Gediminas. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Now, regarding Belarus, it's difficult to say, but what is clear that immigration from more east, let us say Ukraine, Belarus, to European Union countries like Poland, Lithuania, and others is growing, regardless of this social conflict, what is ongoing. So this is quite foreseeable, and again, this border of Europe moving eastwards probably is related to migration process. 20 years ago, people from Lithuania were happily leaving to Britain and other countries. Now, people from a bit more east moving to Lithuania. So probably it's natural, and it will be. I do not want to speculate on those political issues. And now, regarding those fears or risks, my feeling is that as a long-term problem, really this desertification or importance to assure accessibility to health services for all people inside each member state, and of course broader, is the most important issues. Aging is not just problem, it's opportunity. Yeah, we are living longer, we are living happier, so you cannot say that it's bad things. I think we should not look for dramas. Of course, politicians need drama. Yes, our show maybe need the drama, but for life, it's not so important. More important, really, long-term development. And with those vaccines, I also completely agree with Markus that it's achievement of Europeans, of world, in 1 year to develop vaccine. Yeah, and now to cry that certain problems do exist, possible, but it's underestimation of results achieved by humanity. So I am positive about the future and Europe. So thanks.
Okay, Achu, thank you. Can I bring in Jean-Christophe in Paris? I'm not sure if you're in Paris, aren't you, Jean-Christophe? You spoke a lot about receiving nations. The biggest single receiving nation, according to Corinna's PDF that she sent me, was the United Kingdom. And that's going to dramatically change because of Brexit, and everyone from around the world will be treated the same. I'm just wondering, will there be new receiving nations now? I.e., will there be countries that will take a lot more nurses and doctors and health professionals when Britain is gone from that European market?
Well, this is a very difficult question in a way. What will happen after Brexit? I think we have a number of certainty, and there are a few uncertainties. So the certainty is that UK will remain with the same sort of labour needs as before Brexit. This is true for health workers, like this is true for agricultural workers. And we could see during the COVID pandemic, UK bringing in charter flights seasonal workers to pick up fruits and vegetables, and also in other sectors like meat packing industry and so on and so forth. So the needs in the UK health system in terms of nurses and doctors will not change. Will the countries of origin change? Possibly, but on that, if the UK would like to bring in people from Asia, for example, more people from Asia, actually there are already a few people from Asia going to the UK, UK would have to compete with other English-speaking countries, which gets their health workforce from the same countries of origin. Secondly, I mean, as you say, European workers and third country nationals would be on an equal footing. Doesn't necessarily mean that the door is closed. People will still be able to come. Whether people would like to come to the UK, this is the big question. I think, like Oidris said before, I mean, things are changing also in a number of EU countries, and it's very good news to see the change in the net migration to Lithuania. I hope that can be sustainable, but at the same time we also know that the COVID pandemic is probably shifting the focus on health workforce in other countries. A number of countries have realized that they have enough beds, but not enough people to take care of heal people. A number of people have recognized that they have enough doctors, but not enough nurses, etc. So whether that will translate into training more or into recruiting more, it's hopefully this is going to be the first solution and not the second. But this is also a big question mark. Regarding the question you asked before about the east of the European Union, I think this is a super important question because everybody is focused on Africa in other European countries, let's say, and indeed there are some questions about Africa and how we can better manage this relationship with African countries, including in terms of healthcare workers management, but more broadly. When it comes to Eastern European countries, it's not the sea, it's a land border. So the risk is also much bigger that the impact of uncontrolled movements happens. We've seen that these movements can be very important and well managed. For example, in the case of Poland, between Poland and Ukraine, there are more than 1 million temporary workers coming from Ukraine to Poland every year without, any major problem. So that can be well managed, but it can also be source of tensions and of, let's say, concerns in the EU. So we should watch very carefully and act maybe more proactively than we have done in other cases in the past.
Jean-Christophe, merci beaucoup, merci bien à vous. I'd like to thank you all. You've all been incredibly, I have learned so much, I genuinely have. It's been an incredibly interesting 100 minutes. So I'd like to thank you all. Remember, this is going to be recorded and it'll be made available on the link that you clicked to watch this. So when you get it, don't be afraid to share it in your social media, in LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook or whatever you wish. And it'll also be, I'm sure, put back up on the website EIHSD.eu, European Institute of Health and Sustainable Development.eu. I'm going to hand over to the boss, the chair of the EIHSD, to say a final few words and share his thoughts on today's discussion. Thank you. Vitalis.
Thank you, Joe. I'm very happy to conclude. First of all, I would like to thank our distinguished panelists because our presentations were really brilliant and they showed broad panorama of issues and complexity of problems. And of course, also they allow us to continue our seminars. We just thinking about future webinars in April this this year, speaking about modeling of pull and push factors on health labor force mobility. Then in June, we are thinking about possibilities to keep more broader aspect of economics, politics of mobility of labor. And of course, in September, we are ready once again to organize the webinar at Gastein, European Health Forum Gastein level, speaking about, about healthcare workforce, issues about legacy of COVID, about main trends in European health labor force development, and of course about solidarity issues, because now, as never before, COVID showed that we need to think how it is important once again to find mechanisms which can strengthen our solidarity. If you will, forget solidarity as a value, then you can see what was happened with Brexit. Because a lot of people do not believe that solidarity is something real which can help them to address shortages on the ground. Healthcare workforce, shortages on the ground require much more efforts to develop more complex, multi-level mechanisms, but also keeping in mind solidarity and social fairness and equality. Without those mechanisms, we have no chance to encourage people to believe into into European Union project, because health is very close to people's hearts. And here we can move forward with our debates and thinking about pan-European solutions, of course, multi-level, of course, multifactorial and multi-stakeholder solutions. But we need to move forward with our next steps. Thank you very much indeed. I'm very happy about all our panelists and your presentations. Really, we see that we are on right way move forward.
Sorry, mute's my problem. Vitas, thank you very much. Jean-Christophe Dumont from the OECD, Markus Schneider from BASIS in Augsburg, Gediminas Czerniauskas, also from the EIHSD, and to Corinna Hinloper from WAMOS. Thank you all from me, Joe Lynham. Have a great day.
Thank you.